Good morning, this is Dr. Ken Long with True Storytelling on the subject of rituals and intention from March 15th, 2021. Welcome to Kansas. So I was working on some material from Dr. Boji on the difference between dialectic from Hegel and dialogic from Bakhtin. And briefly and overly simplistically, dialectic is the contention between thesis and antithesis, that grappling that produces a synthesis at a higher level of understanding, and it's characterized by being in opposition, struggling, and you get a convergence of those battling positions and then an emergence of a new order, a new way of thinking that combines elements of both in some new fashion. And I think of it like collapsing into a solution. So you have all the possibilities created by the thesis and antithesis. And then, much like a waveform collapses to an electron, you get a collapsing to a particular solution in that moment. As I understand the dialogic from Bakhtin, he thinks of the conversations and the dialogue as being open-ended, expansive, collaborative, with the purpose of illuminating the spaces around the dialogue, that it's generative of new ideas. It diverges and explores, and the intention is an expansion of our appreciation of the complexity of that rich social environment in which we're having this dialogue. So that connects strongly with some reading I've been doing in Dr. Michael Puett from Harvard on his book, The Path, and he talks about the as-if rituals that are offered by Confucius and Confucianism. And he makes the point in a way I hadn't really heard before, and that is that rituals are not in any sense an intention to create a real world. That what makes them so powerful is that they are explicitly unreal. They're powerful because they are unreal, and that the participants know that. I don't know if that's at an unconscious, subconscious, or a conscious level, but I can see all three being in effect. And so the ritual is a deliberate move to create a ritual space, which creates a temporary alternate reality in which we can gain new insights. In the same way that hide and seek with a child, or playful wrestling, or tea partying, or role playing isn't an explicit excursion outside of your normal social roles. It gives a playful quality to the ritual, and which allows you to see things in a new way from a different perspective. And it allows us to shift away from normal social roles and deepen our understanding of the world that we are going to return to. In the same way that learning how to say please and thank you at meals, at one level, is a follow the rules and these are the procedures and this is how we do, but it also is a way to explore the idea that other people have worth and that we may not even be able to see, and that if we come into that transactional interaction with a humble and grateful perspective, that things will go better. And so Puett makes the point that the Confucian rituals for ancestor worship were as if rituals, that the folks in the rituals act as if they were actually true and create a commitment and an emotional context to it, which creates an unworldly moment, which casts a light from a different perspective and deeper to make that connection to what could be. And it occurred to me that maybe that connects with the Platonic ideals at some point, where we think about the absolutes and ideals to which we might aspire but can't directly apprehend except through the conceptual elements. And so maybe the ritual is a way to unlock that better, more refined, ideal relationship between ourselves and our posterity. So I think now of the ritual space versus the worldly space that's created in those rituals. And so if the ritual space has the qualities of being formal, structured, defined, procedural, measured, a deliberate tempo, and fully planned, and that the worldly space, conversely, might be informal, surprising, chaotic, changing, dynamic, evolving, and spontaneous. The world in which we live doesn't look like that ritual space, but it may be that the creation of the ritual space gives us a chance to be more deliberate and multi-dimensional, or multiple perspectives about the world that we're going to go back into. I mean, I think of the, in a practical way, how do we feel when a used car salesman is selling us? And I want to connect this later to some of the ideas of true storytelling. So when I'm being sold a car, I feel like the poor used car salesman, the stereotypical cartoon of a used car salesman, feels like he's being obviously fake and manipulative and artificial and cunning and manipulative and predatory, and that he's cloaking those deeper intentions in this artificial pretense of friendliness and generosity and acting in our best interest. And it's in modern media, that trope is so over the top, like Joe Isuzu, that it obviously reveals the untruth, that disconnect between their inner motivations and their outer face, to the point where you might think of an unscrupulous sales training trying to make the point that, come on guys, if once you can fake sincerity and humility and selflessness, then you've got it made. You can make the sale. And so in a world of thick face and black heart, where we have a lot of exposure to folks being other than what they seem, is it unusual for us to think, well, is this social exchange that I'm engaged in, is this environment just part of an elaborate ruse, a setup designed to get me in the last decisive moves? Are they showing me the first 3 or 4 things that go my way and it just feels so easy, so that I fully commit, and that's what they want? So this is very strongly connected to the prisoner's dilemma, in which you're trying to infer the motivations of the other person at a deep level, in spite of what you may be able to detect from their behaviors in the world. What does that behavior really reveal? And so the ideas of game theory and the parables and the case studies of truth tellers versus liars explores this in a deliberate way. So that world of thick face and black heart connects to true storytelling in the sense that spontaneity is really prized in that traditional Chinese or Confucian world, the world of Wu Wei, in which, in response to an environmental cue, the truth effortlessly emerges. It feels more genuine and true because it doesn't feel like there was time for them to be cunning and contrived, and that it was a natural, effortless response, that effortless action, which feels more genuine and true, and which is connected to spontaneity and charisma, and that my dogs agree, of course. So this is what Edward Slingerland talks about when he talks about Wu Wei and effortless action. In the teachings of true story, truth is seen and felt by the third eye. It resonates with a intuitive, holistic, broad lens view. And in that teaching, that first eye is associated with the direct experience of a thing, where you're not even aware of yourself, you're just totally focused on the information coming from the event or the object or the activity. The second I is one that establishes that subject-object awareness and the relationship between you and that thing. You are now in that lens, and you are aware of your positioning with respect to the object being examined. So it's that subject-object awareness. It's a direct relationship, local context, tightly focused. Probably comes from our predatory nature, our hunting nature. You're focusing on the target. And then that third eye, though, is that broader lens, intuitive sensing of the event under focus in the larger context at the same time, so that you become sensitive to the importance this thing has in the larger worldview, not fully processed, not fully calculated, but it is that sensing of its importance in the rest of the world. And so I think that is connected to this idea of why spontaneity matters so much, because it's a window into truthfulness and inner nature, that a light that penetrates through the thick face black heart. So I see a strong connection between that, and also in game theory, where we're trying to determine what their strategy really is, what their ultimate intention is for that particular game. So now I think about the creation of, some chaos space, the world in all its natural glory, in which lessons about how the games are played and what the rules are, and things that can be learned, lessons are taught to us by nature, by our families, by our school, and by our life. And that's where these ideas of thick face and black heart come from, that people have learned to mask their inner truth, their inner intention, from a world that can be predatory on that. And when we then set up a ritual space, what we're really doing is creating a fenced off place and space in time where we can go through that formal planned process that gives us an alternate perspective. And so things are very orderly inside the chaos that's surrounded. There's a little island of order and purposefulness. And so if we think of our lives as a series of these ritual spaces, they may or may not be connected, but to the extent that they are, and if there is some kind of thematic connections, you might be engaged in building this network of ritual spaces that allow us to bring periodic order to the larger chaos around. And so you have something like this yin-yang of harmony, of moments of order that are connected in time and space, that are telling stories, floating on that sea of chaos and dynamic activity and insight and creativity. And that acts as a nice balancing, in much the same way that pontoons and outriggers work to stabilize sailing ships or rowing ships. And so the Taoist extreme would be one in which, hey, the rituals don't matter at all. It's the space in between, in which the direct connection to creativity and joy and in-the-moment living, the celebration of the now, is expressed like in the poetry of Li Bo. So it's then fair to ask, how do we create those rituals, and what's their utility, and is it beneficial? Because not every one of these might have a positive effect. Some of these might be cultural lessons that have been passed on, and they're just so. And so we can ask, where does that programming come from, and how does it come into our behavior? Well, if we're engaged in life in charting and managing a path through these interconnected ritual spaces to create that sufficient order to achieve, well, what? What is the purpose of that activity that creates order out of what, or for what purpose? Is it because that gives us a sense of control? Is that sense of control just an illusion of control that lets us deal with a world that is in fact out of our control? How much control? Is it just a modicum, and is that enough? And does that vary by people? Does it give us a sense of participation, that we are not just passive reactors in the world, but that we do have some engagement in the world, that the world is responding to us, that we have something to offer? Is there something like a sense of a search for reasonable agency that satisfies us, that we acknowledge that the world is the way it is and it's larger than us and largely beyond our control, but within that, as an actor, I do have some amount of reasonable agency that I'm entitled to? And do I actually have the agency that I think would be reasonable as a practical idea, if I may say it that way? Which leads us and leads me to be thinking about, well, how much agency do we actually have? And compare that to how much do we want? And the satisfaction that comes out, or the dissatisfaction that comes out of those two assessments. And then, is there some amount of agency that we actually need, independent of what we want or what we have, that we should have? You can change the verbs and say, do we have the agency we deserve? Is it something that we have to earn, or is it a given right? Is it God-given, nature-given, or is it something we earned? Is it temporal? Is it permanent? Is it something that we can demand as a right, that we're owed? Is it something that we can receive? Can we actually receive agency for others? They permit us to have the agency, or is it something that we have to? Is it something we have to strive for? Do we have the ability to opt in or opt out? And what does it say to be a person with the potential for agency, but I opt not to play, and I set that aside? Is that a moral question? Does it have an impact on others? Do we have duties to others to act? But if I opt out by not exercising my agency, is that a moral statement? How much choice do we have in establishing all of these things? And that agency is now connected to the ideas of power. Power to have, to create, to implement, to act with agency. The ability to do work requires power. So can we say that agency and creating these spaces where we have power in our lives or over our lives, what's that relationship, and authenticity and justified use of power? And how do we account for that power? How do we recognize it and accept it? Isn't this something that we should be exploring and developing as sentient beings in a world that is beyond the reach of our hands, but which we are participants in? And so that brings me back to the earlier discussion about the value proposition of true storytelling, is that I submit that we're always at a crossroads, whether we're even aware of it or not. The fact that we don't see the path less traveled doesn't mean that it's not there, and that we should recognize at every point on this curve that we're traveling, the well-traveled road, the status quo highway, the road mostly traveled that leads to that well-known destination, at any point on there is genuinely a crossroads in which we can act in this moment with mindfulness. And now the value proposition of true storytelling is that it helps us see that we are at a crossroads, and that for a small investment of time and effort and intention and a risk of vulnerability, that we can enter those true story roundabouts in which a world of infinite futures is actually possible. Because when we go through the safety, trust, truth with each other, we are creating that ritual space in the roundabout, true storyland, in which we can discover these infinite possibilities of opportunities, this future to the nth power, a possible storyline that comes out of our rearrangement or restorying or repurposing of the facts and themes and ideas and impressions of our lives, is illuminated in the exchange of true storytelling through that dialogic of Bakhtin, that you can imagine future 1 or future 2 or future n, and any number of these infinite possibilities. And so we recognize that if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll keep getting what you always got. And maybe that well-known destination and that status quo isn't okay, that it's fair to ask, is that all there is? And is that all there can be, really? And one of the ways that you can answer those questions is through the engagement with trusted others, telling the truth about life as they've seen it, which helps us understand our own internal sense making and reveals our internal sense making through this true story process. And that's what, gets me back to this notion of the collaborative dialogic described by Bakhtin is very much the sense of what we experience in the true storytelling circle. Not a wrestling match to find out who's right or wrong, but a genuine, truthful, safe, trusting relationship with each other to discover more about our lives and the sense that we make of it and what we can make of it now and into the future. So that's my reflections on true storytelling, rituals, and intentions this morning. So thanks for playing along.